This is The Raid, exposing the dark world of America's deportation machine. I'm your host, John Carlos Frey. Alvaro Huerta is the Director of Litigation and Advocacy at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center, a social justice law firm that is dedicated to defending immigrant communities against injustice. His work includes litigation, advocacy, and defending the civil liberties of migrants and asylum seekers. Alvaro is a native of East Los Angeles, a graduate of Yale University and Stanford Law School. He's also the proud son and grandson of immigrants to the United States from Mexico. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
If you don't mind, just tell me a little bit about what you do, the organization, and a little general description of the organization itself.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Litigation and Advocacy at the Immigrant Defenders Law Center, also known as ImmDef. And in that role, I'm supposed to connect what are direct services attorneys, those attorneys who are providing the direct legal services to our clients in immigration court, connect what they're seeing and what our clients are experiencing with the larger kind of systemic change that we're hoping to accomplish. We're part of the immigrants' rights movement, and we're trying to make the system more fair for our clients and the community at large. And so we're trying to bring kind of that impact work, the class action work, and the advocacy, and kind of also the narrative change work to the what the organization does.
What is it? What's the goal? Are you trying to get them out of detention? Are you trying to get them some kind of legal status or not be deported? What's the goal? It's different in every case?
It's different in every case, right? I think, I mentioned it's important to have an attorney at your side in immigration court. It is a very labyrinthine process. The laws are very convoluted, have become more convoluted over the years in terms of what people are eligible for or not, meaning can they stay? Do they have a pathway to lawful permanent residency or citizenship eventually? In many cases, our organization is working on behalf of people who are detained, so immediately trying to get them out on bond or otherwise released if we can, because it affects not only their livelihood, but that of their families, right? Sometimes you're talking about the only breadwinner being detained and not showing up for work the next Monday morning, and then the family has to figure out what to do. So really that's kind of the emergency situation that we're trying to help out with. But generally, as I said before, it was a little, I wouldn't say easier, but when we're not dealing with just immediately trying to get someone out of custody, it's fighting their removal case, right? Fighting that the government is basically saying, you don't have lawful status, you don't have a right to be here, and so we're going to deport you eventually. We're trying to find out if that person does have some kind of means to stay. That could be an asylum case, that could be in the case for children. There's a special visa for abandoned children, for example. It could be lots of different relief that, again, the person might not know themselves that they are eligible for. That's why they need an attorney to kind of go through. In some cases, there's examples of people who didn't realize they had a relative that qualified them for some kind of immigration relief. So just identifying what those different avenues might be.
What are you seeing?
What am I saying?
Like, what are some of the areas that you believe that need to have some form of legal impact? Obviously, I think I know it's what's going on today, but I just kind of want to hear it from you.
Yeah, I think writ large, it's the problems with the due process in our system, right? We're seeing an immigration system that is really unfair, fundamentally unfair to the people who are going through it. And on top of it, we have an administration right now that has taken advantage of those, the lack of due process protections. So specifically, right now, we're seeing the administration really bring a hammer down and try to make an example of Los Angeles, right? We know this administration is very anti-immigrant, has made that the heart of their campaign in the U.S. to keep power. And they think that Los Angeles, which, is a sanctuary city, it's not a defined term, but is a city that refuses to use its services, for example, its money, to aid in immigration enforcement. The administration doesn't like that. And so we're seeing what we started seeing in June were these really terrible raids, right? Roving patrols of ICE agents, CBP agents across Southern California and including Los Angeles, really cruelly taking people in, kind of take them in, ask questions later style, right? If someone looked like an immigrant, if someone was speaking Spanish or English without an accent, or they were targeting certain locations like Home Depots or car wash places of employment, really going after folks there, regardless of whether they had any evidence that those people had lawful status or not.
2026, it looks like it's going to get worse. They're hiring 10,000 more agents. They're infusing detention facilities with billions of dollars. The hiring standards for new officers and agents coming on have been lowered to be able to get people on board faster. They are deputizing police agencies. They are pouring money into police agencies. The idea of a sanctuary city is going to be condemned by the administration on even higher grounds. Can you explain a little bit about what a sanctuary city is? And then maybe we can talk about the money that's going into municipalities.
Sure. So there's no actual definition of a sanctuary city, but effectively what it means is that a local municipality has decided, or in some cases some states, have decided that they will not use local monies to support federal immigration enforcement. And that could be ensuring that their jails are not used to house immigrants, that their law enforcement officers are not, deputized to do federal immigration enforcement. So they're basically saying, we're in the business of taking care of our residents. We're not in the business of immigration. That's a federal enforcement issue.
So the federal government gives money directly to police agencies, local police agencies, to become immigration agents for the most part.
In many cases, yes. There are many localities that want to support, kind of are aligned with this administration's kind of anti-immigrant agenda and want to remove people. And so they'll take money, these 287G agreements, what they're called, where the federal government effectively deputizes local law enforcement to become immigration agents in many ways. And that comes with a lot of money. There's these joint task forces where it's state and local federal and local agents working together to conduct immigration enforcement. Whether it's, the federal government granting a contract to a local community so that converting their jail or some of their jail space into immigration detention space.
So back to my idea that it's going to get worse before it gets better because of $170 billion that are going to be pumped into this infrastructure next year, more agents, more 287G agreements with local police forces, more detention facilities, badly trained agents. They want to get to their quota, as you were talking about, and they're pouring a lot of effort and money into it starting in January of next year. Are you daunted by that at all?
I am, and I think we all should be, right? I don't think this is the system that we really want. I'm not sure this is what we signed up for, what anyone signed up for, even those who were supporting this administration. This administration said that they were going after criminal immigrants. I still think all of those people deserve an immigration attorney and immigration court as well. And some of them shouldn't be removed because they have a lawful pathway of staying in the country. But certainly this huge amount of money that we've infused into our immigration system, ICE is now the largest funded law enforcement agency in the country, in the federal government. And its budget is about to go up by 4 times.
More than the FBI, more than the CIA.
More than any of those. In fact, maybe them combined. So we're really seeing this arm of the federal government that's going to be in almost every community, seeking out people, again, in ways that we would say are unlawful, targeting people of color, targeting people who don't speak English. And they're going to be in our communities, and it is daunting to know that that's coming. I think we can prepare our communities for that in many ways. We can ensure that people know their rights, but it is going to get worse before it gets better. And I think until we have some federal reforms on the federal level, it isn't going to get better. We're going to see more of these videos of people being harmed with excessive force. We're going to see indiscriminate, targeting of people of color who don't fit this idea of what it means to be American.
So with the work that you do at ImmDef, what specifically would you do with this kind of a situation? What are sort of the details?
Yeah, so ImmDef is part of what's called the Los Angeles Rapid Response Network, which is a grouping of different organizations, immigrant rights organizations, some that provide legal services, some that do community organizing or just outreach to immigrant communities. And it's a grouping of folks who will receive a phone call, for example, from a family member if their loved one is missing or they think that they were taken up in a raid. They reach out to us, and ImmDef handles a lot of the legal casework. And so we might not take every single case, we might refer it to others, but we often are the first people to try to find that person, locate them in detention. During these raids, a lot of people were taken to B18, which is the basement level of the federal building downtown.
What is that? It's an office building turned into a detention facility. Do I have that right?
Effectively, yeah. It's what they call a processing center. It's basically where someone's taken so that they can get their fingerprints taken, their information taken down, and then if they have some kind of immigration case, they're targeted, right? They're marked. And then it's only a processing facility, so people aren't supposed to be there for more than 12 hours at most. But what we were seeing were people were being held for days on end sometimes. We had examples of people being there for 7 days, 12 days, even in one case. And this is not a facility that is meant for that. There are no beds. There are no showers. The restrooms are very public around. You're kind of in a room with everybody else. They're not meant to hold people for that long, but that's what we were seeing. We were seeing people being held for days on end. And early on, we couldn't find some of these folks for days because if they didn't already have an immigration case, there was nothing to connect them, right? There was no A number or alien number, as they call it, for us to be able to find them. So it's not until they're given this A number that we were able to locate them. Sometimes they're at B18. Sometimes they had already been processed and sent to a longer-term detention facility, like the ones at Adelanto, which is about an hour and a half from Los Angeles.
So you provide pro bono legal services for the individual who is being detained?
That's right. Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization. All our services are provided pro bono, and we have what's called a universal representation model, which means we don't discriminate on whose cases we're taking. We're not deciding, does their case have a chance of winning or not? We fundamentally believe that everyone who's going through the immigration system deserves a lawyer. And if we can provide that service, we're going to do it.
How many lawyers in the organization?
We have somewhere around 70 to 80 lawyers right now.
And these are all contracted out through other firms. It's not all under your umbrella, right?
No, it's actually all under ImmDef. They're all ImmDef staff members, and we provide our services for free.
And how do these lawyers get paid? How do they make a living?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so we try to get funding from grant sources, foundations, individual donors, and we do have some contracts with the city, various cities, Los Angeles, Santa Ana, San Diego.
I'm going to assume that 70 attorneys isn't enough.
Not nearly enough. Not for the amount of people, especially now that we're seeing going through the system. And this administration is making it incredibly hard for folks to, even get through the system, right? Before, for example, we might be serving a lot of people who are not detained. They might have to check in with ICE once a year, twice a year. But they're fighting their immigration removal case while they're released and can be with their family members. Now the administration is really changing the rules where anyone who entered without inspection, as they call it, or undocumented, is now subject to being held in detention while their case proceeds. So now we're trying to fight on a different front of trying to get people released so that they can at least be with their families while their case proceeds through the system.
But that would require some kind of a bond?
That's right. And they're saying that they're not eligible for bond. So before we could try to request a bond, make a case before an immigration judge, and oftentimes get those people out on bond. Now they're saying hey, if you entered without, you crossed the border, technically you're not allowed to receive bond, which is just an upending of the way we've understood the system for decades.
What is if you've been in the country for under 2 years, you can't bond out, and if you've been here over 2 years, you do qualify for a bond? Do I have that wrong?
A little bit. So if you're here for less than 2 years, you're subject to what's called expedited removal, which means the administration can start removal proceedings against you, and you actually don't get to go before an immigration judge to challenge the reasons for your removal unless you have some asylum claim, for example. You can request what's called a credible fear interview, where they'll then decide, do you have some kind of credible fear that returning you to your home country would put you in danger? That's kind of the only process that you're allowed when you're in expedited removal.
It all sounds like a maze. I'm sure most people don't even know if they qualify, if they don't qualify, what status they have. You said everybody deserves to have an immigration lawyer. What's the difference between somebody who's advocating for themselves, who doesn't have a lawyer, when they go before a judge or with their case?
I mean, it depends on the person, right? For example, we represent children. We represent unaccompanied children who cross the border by themselves or with some adult perhaps, but not a legal guardian or parent. And they're considered unaccompanied children in this country, which means they actually are due some extra protections to make sure that, for example, we're not deporting them back to be trafficked, that we're not deporting them back to danger. They're trying to flee some kind of terrible situation for them. So they get extra protections. But if you can imagine that child trying to represent themselves in court, it's kind of laughable that we would expect. We're talking about, anywhere between 2-year-old to 17-year-old children representing themselves in court where they're alone on one side and the government has an attorney on the other side trying to get them removed.
So it does happen.
It can happen, but that's why we're there. We're there to, we're often assigned to them as their attorney. But at the beginning of this year, for example, the Trump administration attempted to defund all of the organizations that were providing these legal services. We challenged that decision in court, and luckily right now we do have a court ruling that says that they must provide these services to children, legal services. But if they could get their way, they would probably try to take away that funding.
The Trump administration tried to force immigration attorneys to not represent children.
Meaning that the government wouldn't fund them. Immigrants have a right to an attorney in immigration court. They just don't have a right to state-funded or government-funded attorneys, which is very different than our criminal system, right? In our criminal system, if you're accused of a crime, you are entitled to either pay for your own attorney or get one provided to you by our government. Even though the stakes are probably just as high, if not higher, in immigration court, that right is not there for immigrants. Some of these people are going to be deported potentially to their deaths or to torture, to violence. The fact that we don't provide attorneys to them at government funding means that a lot of people are going to go into court without any attorney. They're not going to be able to provide them themselves. They don't have the funds for that. So it's not just kids, right? It's adults as well. We also represent people with mental health incompetency. Like a court has actually determined that they couldn't represent themselves in court. That's one of the few areas where the federal government is required to provide federally funded attorneys for those deemed mentally incompetent people in court. They also tried to get rid of that funding this year.
Do you have a sense as to why? It sounds cruel. I mean, just on the surface, on the face of it, it sounds cruel. But I'm wondering in the court filings, when they were trying to remove the funding for children and for people with mental incompetency, what's the reason? Are they trying to save how much money?
I think they claim that it's a money issue, that it's not actually a right that they're allowed to have in court, that they might be able to get an attorney, but it shouldn't be funded by the government. But I think it is really cruelty is the point. They're trying to make life in the country difficult so that people will choose to give up, so that they give up hope, that they give up their opportunities if they're eligible for some kind of relief, and they'll decide to sign away their rights and go away. And I think it's not a coincidence that they are targeting very vulnerable immigrant communities, children, people with mental health issues, mental incompetency, because that's the easiest targets. You can get those folks out. You can get your numbers up. We understand that they have a quota, right? They're trying to get rid of, deport and remove a certain number of people per month, per week. And they can't, though they claim that they're going after, those with, long criminal histories, et cetera, we know that the numbers aren't there for them to reach their quotas if they're just going for people with criminal histories. So the next thing they can do is just go for people who might not be able to defend themselves in court.
Can you tell me a story? I'm a little curious as to what makes let's say a 13-year-old or a teenager, young person, too young to work, too young to drive. What makes them leave their home country and make that what I'm assuming is a dangerous journey, and then going across the border and being here without a legal guardian or a parent? Do you know of such a case?
Yeah, I mean, we get all of these cases so often. A lot of times they're fleeing some kind of dangerous situation, right? I'm thinking of, Salvadoran children who are leaving because they've been targeted by gangs for recruitment. I'm thinking of another client who left Afghanistan because they were forced to enter a madras, a school, right, where they were going to be eventually, put into the military for the Taliban. So it's people who are leaving, oftentimes fleeing very quickly, and their parents have made a decision, if they can't all go together, they're going to send at least their child to safety, if that child is being targeted specifically. So it's a tough choice that these parents have to make to, take that step of separating themselves from their kids, but sending them to somewhere that they believe is going to be safe for them. And once they get here, sometimes they are in a much better situation. They find that safety, but they still are inevitably going to be put in removal proceedings because our government kind of treats everyone who comes here, unless they have, a valid asylum claim. And even then, we're making it very hard for those folks. All of those kids are going to be in removal proceedings.
You're not talking about a migrant who's coming to commit a crime or maybe even try and take advantage of the United States. You're talking about a refugee. You're talking about somebody who doesn't have an option to stay home.
That's right.
But the government doesn't see it that way.
I think the way the government sees it is that there are too many people coming to this country that are going to change the demographic makeup of this country.
It's a demographic issue?
I think in many ways it is. I think there is this fear that when you have people coming from other countries, people who don't look like you, they're going to change the makeup of this country. And I think for some people that's very scary. We see some evidence, right, where they're not saying the same thing about refugees from South Africa right now, for example. They're claiming that, these Afrikaners from South Africa are fleeing some kind of dangerous situation for them there, and they're the only ones who are getting or who are being allowed to come in through our refugee system.
You see a racial component?
Definitely a racial component. I mean, those are majority white Afrikaners from South Africa who are being allowed in, based, in fact, they say, on some kind of racism they suffered in South Africa. We're not giving that same credence to the claims that other asylum seekers have if those countries happen to be people of color.
Racism typically in our history is never really declared as racism when it's happening. You kind of take a look at the effects of policies, the effects of certain actions against a certain class of people or a certain culture or ethnicity. And then in hindsight, we say that they are being unfairly treated or targeted. So when people say racism, we all kind of cringe. I mean, our government can't necessarily be racist, but everything you're describing is going after a certain type of people. Do you see it that way?
Yes, to a certain extent, because I think, we use immigration in this country as a proxy for race, right? And status. It's not legally, it's not the same. There are different, we differentiate in the law immigration status and the rights that people have based on their status versus, our legal jurisprudence technically says we are not going to use race in many ways, right? It's not, a white person who lives in LA who's worried about, being picked up by immigration enforcement because the Supreme Court is allowing it. It's the brown person who might not speak Spanish or might not speak English or might speak Spanish or English with an accent who's worried about going about their daily life, whether that person is undocumented or not. Because we now have many examples where people who just are brown, look immigrant, whatever that means, have been targeted. So we can see that the effects end up being racialized.
Geographically, the raids are also taking place in high percentages in brown neighborhoods. They're not targeting Beverly Hills. They're not targeting Santa Monica with raids. You're not going to see raids there. You're going to see raids in parts of East Los Angeles or in the Valley where large concentrations of Latinos are. That sounds like a racial component as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's very purposeful. In fact, now we're seeing in some of the documents they're giving their rationale for why they're targeting certain areas. They say, well, the number of undocumented people in Los Angeles County is this much, and it's concentrated in these areas and at these types of workplaces. So they're trying to rationalize it by saying, well, the stats show that it's more likely than not that some people there will be undocumented. But there's no doubt that when you overlay that with the demographic, residential areas of Los Angeles or Southern California, they definitely are targeting places where people of color, primarily Latinos, live and work.
I want to go through a deconstruction of the ICE raids, or what I'm starting to see more are Border Patrol raids. Border Patrol, much more heavy-handed. And if you can kind of inform me about the legality of what we're all seeing. I know that some of the apprehensions are on the books. They're allowed to do, in some cases, what they're doing, but it feels a little bit heavy-handed. The use of force is certainly high. There are a lot of pieces that most people, I don't think, are understanding, that federal agents are committing crimes in the apprehension of individuals, at least maybe even a civil matter. We do have rights as residents, whether you're legal or not. So can I just go step by step of what I'm seeing on video clips and what I'm seeing on the news? So if an agent or an officer who is a federal agent, ICE or Border Patrol, comes up to somebody on the street and says, "Show me your papers," just because of what they look like. Are you here in the country legally? They may ask this person. Is that legal? That a federal officer can go up to anybody indiscriminately and ask for papers?
Well, it gets a little complicated because under the immigration laws, if you're here and are not, you have lawful residency, for example, you're not yet a citizen, you are actually technically required to have proof that you're here lawfully.
On your person.
On your person, yeah. But the step before that about the decision to ask a specific person whether they are here lawfully, an immigration enforcement officer has to suspect for some reason that that person may be committing a crime, in this case, not being here lawfully. And if they don't have that reason, what's called reasonable suspicion, they're not allowed to do that. They're not at least allowed to stop you and then detain you in order to ask you those things.
And my reasonable suspicion in this case is that you speak Spanish, or you work at a car wash, or you're brown, right? Those are the people who they are going to reasonably suspect are not in the country legally.
Yeah, and we would argue that's not even reasonable suspicion. That isn't sufficient, right? Because of all those things that you said, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're here unlawfully, just because you're brown, or you're working at a car wash, or you speak Spanish. There are plenty of people I know who fit that and have papers or are citizens even. So that's not enough. That isn't reasonable suspicion. They would argue that they have some other rationale. They have yet to show us what that rationale is.
The clips I'm seeing are directly what I just said. They're walking up to brown people who speak Spanish and are asking them for papers. I don't see them in any other way suspecting anything else other than those factors there, that they speak Spanish and that they're brown.
Yeah,
So what's the violation? What is
yeah.
that particular federal agent? What violation are they committing when they do that?
So they're committing what we would call Fourth Amendment violation, right? We all, regardless of your status in this country, have Fourth Amendment rights to due process and to ensure that, I'll start that over because it's not due process. That's Fifth Amendment. So what we would argue is that that is a Fourth Amendment violation because we're all, regardless of our status in this country, under the Fourth Amendment, entitled to rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, meaning that if a law enforcement agent is going to stop us for a while, and they're allowed to do, short stops in many cases if they're trying to investigate whether a crime is being committed. But in this case, when it's immigration related, they need more than just the fact that you're brown or speak Spanish. That's just not sufficient. It's not reasonable to believe that just because someone is brown or speaks Spanish, that they're in the country unlawfully for the same reason I just said. There are plenty of people who fit that criteria who aren't, who are citizens. So that's not enough. That's a violation of our Fourth Amendment rights.
So we'll go one step further then. Say the individual that we're talking about says, yes, I am here legally, or I am a U.S. citizen or a legal U.S. resident. Mm-hmm. And the federal officer doesn't believe them. They don't have proof on them. They don't have the papers with them because they're at work or whatever it is. I don't carry my passport everywhere I go or proof of legal citizenship. So if the officer doesn't believe them, is there a violation there?
There's a violation there if the officer can't rationalize why they don't believe them, right? If they don't have something more to say, okay, I don't believe you because X, Y, and Z. I've seen you before, for whatever reason they can give. They're able to rationalize why that's not sufficient, especially if someone says, for example, hey, I live down the block and I could get my ID. That seems like a reasonable thing to be able to then say to the officer, okay, I can prove, what we're seeing instead is those officers then taking those people, detaining them, taking them in oftentimes, or at least, arresting them, detaining them for a while, like in a car, while they're trying to figure it all out. That would be it, without being able to rationalize why they kept that person, especially when there were reasonable things they could have done to determine that person's identity. That we would say is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
You say rationalizing. The officer involved here has to set, there are certain standards, criteria that individual must meet in order for me to take the next step, which would be to arrest that person. There has to be some kind of evidence or proof that person is not in the country for me to detain them.
There has to be something that the agent can articulate, right? That they can say as a reason why they decided to go a different route, why they decided not to release that person. They have to be able to articulate that. Kind of getting into the details, whenever folks know that, like, if there's an incident, a policeman would have to write a police report. The same thing happens with immigration agents. They have to write an incident report, and they have to be able to articulate what were the reasons that they pulled someone over, that they stopped someone on the street. What were those reasons that they had to believe that person was in the country unlawfully or committing a crime, etc. If they can't do that, then that really doesn't pass muster when it comes to the protections that we're supposed to be afforded under the Fourth Amendment. Unfortunately, I would argue that a lot of agents make up those reasons after the fact. After they have discovered maybe someone's in the country unlawfully, they'll say like, oh yes, I thought X, Y, and Z. It might not have been something they thought before. Again, they could have just been thinking that person's brown, that person's hanging around places that we think a lot of undocumented people hang out, and therefore I'm going to stop them.
According to Border Patrol, high-ranking Border Patrol agents, that's cause for them to arrest someone. The fact that they speak Spanish, the fact that they're hanging out in a place where migrants typically hang out, on a farm, in a field, in construction sites, at a car wash, and they look a certain way. That's enough for me to have that reasonable suspicion. You don't agree with that?
I don't agree, because that's the use of statistics that I think are in many ways flawed, that they're saying because, say, 10% of the people there are likely to be undocumented, however they rationalize that, then we can ask anybody there, whether they're undocumented or not, ask them for their papers. That's not the way our system works. You have to be able to articulate those reasons for every individual. You have to be able to say, I think that person is undocumented and I'm going to ask them for their papers. You can't go to a group of people and then assume that you're going to find some undocumented people there. That's not our system is meant to prevent that, in fact, because we don't want law enforcement to overreach, to be able to stop you based on these, things that they're not supposed to consider, like race, like language, like where you work, that they're not supposed to be able to take a group of people and then decide those people are now subject to random searches and seizures.
I'm not seeing that happen. I'm not seeing them follow the tenets that you're describing, and I'm assuming that that individual who was apprehended and profiled because of what they look like or the language that they speak, you're not going to be able to get them out of detention based on that defense. They're going to stay. An immigration judge isn't going to take your word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's difficult, right? We would argue in court that the way that they were picked up was unlawful, and therefore any evidence that comes from that unlawful arrest shouldn't be included in their case. It's kind of a tenet of the way our laws work that if the arrest was unlawful, if the cop or agent couldn't articulate a valid reason for arresting someone,
it's thrown out.
It's thrown out. We're finding that being a challenging argument in many cases, and some of the immigration judges are saying, I can't really look at that, or that, that's not the way it's going to work. In some cases, we have been able to do that because we've been able to show that they shouldn't have been arrested to begin with at all. But it is not a sure thing, and that's why it makes it even more important to ensure that agents aren't able to use these rationalizations that we say do not pass constitutional muster, that they aren't able to get away with that to begin with.
The next step, use of force. Somebody who may be afraid, doesn't know what this this plainclothes masked agent aggressively asking them questions, accusing them of being in the country illegally, even though I may have papers somewhere or I may be in the country legally, there is a really aggressive approach, and they may even be tackled and handcuffed without any show of force from the individual themselves. The individual may just be trying to resist verbally or trying to have an argument, and they're tackled. I mean, we see these clips all the time. What violation here? That excessive use of force.
Yeah, it's a really startling thing that we're seeing all these videos, and I should say it's good that we're seeing these videos in that sense, right? We're seeing these tactics, what they're doing, and people can't deny that it hits you a little harder when you see immigration agents, supposed immigration agents, like you said. Sometimes, we I guess we're made to assume that these are immigration agents, but these are masked men, plain clothes, in unmarked cars, pulling over and surrounding an individual or a group of individuals. Anyone, I think, would be scared in that situation, not knowing, is this an agent? Even when asked, some of these agents don't identify themselves, don't give a badge number. That shouldn't be the system that we work under. That feels like a police state. And we have seen these very violent tactics that they use, right? Like you said, tackling people on the ground, not letting them speak, not letting them talk about, that they might have ID in their back pocket, etc. It's kind of the take them down first and ask questions later. It is excessive force. It is a violation when they don't have cause to believe, for example, that someone's going to flee or is a danger. That's a whole different level. They have to be able to show that they needed to use some of these techniques because someone was attempting to get away or is somehow a danger. But again, if they're not targeting specific people, they don't really have a reason to believe that person would run away or harm them necessarily.
So I cannot use force as a federal agent just to teach that person a lesson. Who's boss? I can't take someone down because you're bad-mouthing me or because you're not answering my questions. The only way I can use force if I somehow feel like you're a threat. I need to use what's called commensurate force. I can use the amount of force on you to subdue you or to keep you from threatening me, right? I can't just do it without you showing me any kind of forces you say, or you say they're going to flee. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right. They can only use, if they feel threatened in some way and need to subdue someone, they can use, like you said, a commensurate amount of force. Still non-lethal, non-excessive, something to just subdue the person. But they can't do what we've been seeing in these videos, which is tackling to the people to the ground, in many ways, harming folks, and just being aggressive to people because they're trying to throw people into a truck, throw them into somewhere where, they won't get away, quote unquote. But we have been seeing them use excessive force in all of these videos.
So I, as an agent, shouldn't be allowed to pull my gun on you if you haven't threatened me with physical harm.
That's right.
But I see that happening. I see people being pepper sprayed. I see people being punched or pulled out of a car. I see cars being rammed by unmarked vehicles. Those are all excessive uses of force. What legal standing do I have? Can I sue that agent? Are they in the commission of a crime? Should they be prosecuted?
So there are laws on the books that allow the lawsuits against federal officials, in this case, ICE and CBP agents. But we've seen those laws also be limited over the years, right? There's now different standards that are used to determine whether someone's use of force or other violation of the law can be brought, whether you can bring a case against them. The Supreme Court and other courts have really limited those rules to make it even harder now to challenge excessive use of force cases, saying, well, it's kind of a gray area or on the edge. And so even though there might be on the books an ability to bring a case, it's a lot harder to win those cases nowadays.
Okay. I am tackled by a border agent or a ICE agent. I'm put in the back of a vehicle. Let's just say it's not even a patrol car, a van. I don't even know what it is, but I'm handcuffed and I'm being taken somewhere and I don't even know why. I haven't been told what my offense is, what crime I've committed. I haven't been Mirandized. I haven't been told my rights. I'm just being shipped off to some unknown location. Is that a violation?
It's a violation not to be told why you're arrested. You certainly have a right to know why you've been arrested. Now, whether you're going to get an answer or not is up to those.
But you're
agents.
saying I have a right to be told, and you're also saying you may not be told.
Yeah, and you may not be told. And that's because that's the kind of policies that they're using now, right? That they might not give you the answers right away. Eventually, as you're being driven to some location, you might be told you're being taken into immigration custody, but you might not know when you are arrested. And we do recommend people demand that answer, as soon as they can. But at least we have too many examples where people were not told.
What violation of what amendment? Is that the 14th Amendment?
So it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment still, to your right against unreasonable searches and seizures. And so you're supposed to be told the reasons why you're being both detained or eventually arrested.
So I'm arrested, I'm handcuffed, I'm now being shipped off to an unknown location, a detention facility, a processing center, possibly. I'm not given any other rights to an attorney. I'm not given the right to make a phone call. I can't call my loved ones. I can't let them know where I am. I'm sort of disappeared for at least a period of time, sometimes days. My loved ones may not know where I am. That's happening.
That's happening. We have examples. Just today I heard of another example where we're trying to locate someone who's been missing for days. And it's unfortunate that we still are hearing these examples months later into these raids, that it's very difficult for people to find their loved ones oftentimes. And people do have a right to, once people are processed, we understand sometimes it takes a while to process someone through the system, give them an A number or give them some other way of, connecting the name to the person. But that shouldn't take longer than, the 12 hours or so that would be under the normal process. Certainly not days on end where you can't find a loved one.
That's on purpose, do you think?
I think sometimes it might be on purpose. I think, frankly, it's more incompetency than on purpose. I think, kind of the systems that we have in place there's opportunities to lose someone in a system. When you're treating people as numbers instead of individuals, it's easy to not think about those concerns that someone might be looking for this person, might be desperately trying to find them, and, might not be able to because you haven't assigned them a number, or you don't know who you've rounded up, who you've brought in, and aren't kind of going through the process to figure that out quickly. So I think it's actually more oftentimes kind of the way our system works and the incompetence of it than necessarily on purpose. Although I do think the conditions that we're seeing in some of these processing centers and detention facilities are intentionally made to be deplorable, right? Like bad, so that people will lose hope.
As a deterrent strategy.
As a deterrent strategy. I do think they're intentionally making it not a fun experience. Not that it has to be a fun experience, but they're intentionally making it difficult on people so that they lose hope. Constantly bombarding them with, hey, you can get out if you just sign your rights away.
If there's a deterrent strategy or a punishment for crossing the border illegally, let's just say the person that I'm describing crossed the border without papers and got caught. What violation is that?
That's not a violation, meaning it's not a violation to, if someone crosses the border without papers, our immigration law says that they can be taken into custody and removed if they don't have some...
It's not a felony, though, right?
It's not a felony. There are some laws on the books that are misdemeanor and felony to be literally caught crossing the border. That's not the case with most of these cases, right? Someone might have entered decades ago without paperwork or overstayed on a visa. So they didn't commit the crime of crossing the border and being caught doing so. And so they're not charged with that necessarily. These are what are called then civil infractions. We see our immigration system, we kind of have configured in a way where it's a civil issue to be remedied by removal versus a criminal issue that requires jail time.
So the punishment is to deport the person, to send them back to their country of origin.
Exactly. And we say that it's not punishment. It's just kind of righting the wrong of, this administrative mistake that you came in, and so therefore you're allowed to be removed. And that's actually fundamentally why someone in a criminal and who's charged with a crime has more rights in that sense, a right to an attorney, for example, paid for by the government, because it's the criminal system, and we don't have those same rights in the civil immigration system because we don't see it as rising to the level of a crime in many instances, and therefore doesn't have you aren't then given the right to a lawyer.
It's not rising to the level of crime, but I am being treated as a criminal.
That's right. Effectively, you are, and like I said before, you might be. The solution is to remove you or deport you. And that could be worse than being put in jail for your life, right? If you're being removed, deported to a country that you were fleeing because you were fleeing to save your own life, you might be sent right back to those harmful conditions. And in many cases, we are sending people back to their deaths.
Go to the next step. I'm now in a detention facility. In that detention facility, the conditions, I'm assuming there are violations there. I don't have a proper place to sleep. The food is deplorable. I may get one meal, maybe 2 meals. I'm packed in a cell that is probably above capacity. I may not be able to reach out. I may not be able to make a phone call. The phone calls are expensive. I may not be able to access my attorney. My attorney may not even know where I am. I may not be able to get medical care because of the type of medical care that is provided in these facilities. All of those seem to me at least to be human rights violations, if not some kind of violations of law, by the way that I'm treated while I'm in detention.
Yeah, everything you described is what we hear in various different immigration detention facilities. horrible crowding, the food not being adequate, no access to hygiene products in many cases, the temperatures being so cold that you can't sleep, the lights being on all the time. We see that. We hear those stories all the time. And depending on the facility, some are better than others. Immigration detention is not supposed to be punitive. Again, it's just, kind of like a place where we hold you until we can remove you. So we would challenge any of those conditions based on them being actually punitive. And like I say, I do think they're intentionally creating these punitive conditions to coerce people into signing away their rights, which is a violation of their due process, because some of these people, again, might have been taken in, but they have an asylum case. They have a visa, or were here with temporary protected status. They have a way of staying in the country lawfully and are being detained, we would say, unlawfully. And so we would fight those kind of conditions that they're put under, because our immigration system, at least on paper, is not supposed to punish people because they were here in the country unlawfully. It's just if they don't have a way of staying, our immigration law says that they can be removed. But while they're detained, they can't be punished for that.
What standards is the federal government supposed to adhere to when it comes to detaining somebody? If I incarcerate you, if you've committed a crime and you've been convicted of a crime and I put you in a prison system, there are certain standards that the federal government or the state agency is supposed to adhere to treat that individual, right?
Yeah, there are standards. There are national standards that are set by Congress and then through regulation are supposed to be implemented at every detention facility. One important thing to understand, too, is that many of our immigration facilities are run by private corporations. We've contracted them out to these private corporations, and they have some standards as well, but they don't always meet our standards. And even though there are supposed to be periodic reviews, inspections by the government at some of these facilities, we know that we've documented different abuses that aren't then followed up on. And especially under this administration, the current administration has basically decimated some of those oversight bodies. I'm thinking about the civil rights and civil liberties arm of DHS, for example, that is supposed to take complaints of people who are held in detention. The Office of Immigrant Detention Ombudsman oversees detention facilities, but those offices have been decimated under this administration. So you have maybe one or two people currently working in those these agencies or sub-agencies that really can't oversee what's happening, that can't take in all the complaints and actually do something about them.
So you're allowing a private corporation that's a for-profit model to skimp and save and cut corners and, maximize profits at the expense of how they're holding people for sometimes months on end, right?
Yeah.
I've never heard somebody coming out of detention that loved the experience.
Never. Yeah, you wouldn't, right? Because you're kept away from your family in conditions that are not good. And, you have the specter of being potentially removed the whole time. And I think the standards that we have for these facilities have gone down, not only under this administration, but generally. We're now trying to open up, especially because with this drive to put more and more people into removal proceedings and then keeping them detained while those proceedings take place, you're seeing overcrowding. There's no way that we can build as many facilities as would be needed to hold that many people. So we're just piling them in to now makeshift, sometimes tent cities. And even though now Congress has approved a tremendous billions of dollars that will be infused into the system, it's going to take a while before we can build new facilities to house all these people. And so you're just going to see those conditions worsen.
There's nothing that I can do as a detainee, as somebody who is in detention and suffering those kinds of conditions. There's nobody that I can call. There's no complaint that I can file. There's no process by which those conditions are going to change, right? Can I file a lawsuit? Can I do something to change the way that the conditions are?
You can file a complaint, but like I said, the oversight bodies right now have been decimated and there's no one to really follow up on it. And yeah, you can file a lawsuit if you have an attorney, right, who's willing to go up against the federal government and bring a case on conditions, which does require a lot of evidence collection. It's not just about one person being detained. It's about the whole facility and trying to collect as much evidence as you can. Sometimes those are people who are deported, right? Who are you going to collect the evidence from if that person is now removed?
So everything that I've described, from somebody being questioned on the street to being apprehended to being detained, you describe severe violations of civil liberties, amendments, probably criminal behavior. And for the most part, there isn't much that the individual who's going through that process can do. The government gets to do what they want without repercussion.
But I do think there is an ability to fight back. And I think that's what we and other organizations are trying to do and trying to work with immigrant communities to do. Because I don't want people to feel like they're alone in the system or that they don't have some kind of agency to push back. I think, unfortunately, that's where a lot of people end up, thinking that they lose all hope. And even if they have family here, even if they might have some way of staying, they're going to give up, because the best thing is not to be detained for months on end and somehow maybe return to their home country and provide for their family that way. So I don't want to kind of give into this hopelessness that the system is set up in many ways that it's going to be very difficult for people, but they should have hope that they might be able to be together with their loved ones if they fight back.
Stay strong. Stay strong,
right? In many cases, there is a way for them to at least be released on bond, even if they're fighting their case for months or years. They can at least be with their loved ones during that time.
Very well said. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Raid, available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about our guests and the subjects we cover, please visit our website at theraidpodcast.org.